Hi, my name is Maureen and I'm Director of Interfaith Scotland. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you to our 6th Facebook Live event. This one is The Climate Crisis Beyond the Next Generation. This event is being held as part of our Beyond series, which looks at the climate crisis from many different angles. In previous months, we've looked at the climate crisis beyond politics, beyond religion, beyond science, beyond economics, and beyond borders. The series will continue monthly right up until November, when the COP26 Climate Summit will be coming to Glasgow. The purpose of calling a series the Beyond series is to demonstrate that the climate crisis is beyond anything humanity has ever faced, and that we need to face the challenges as a united humanity. United across all the diverse facets of life: politics, religion, science, economics, borders, and generations. Interfaith Scotland has made this year a year of climate action, and we hope that the action we take as an interfaith organisation will make a difference. Today, we have 3 distinguished young speakers: Jen Stout, Anish Subramaniam, and Alexandra Goossens-Ishii. Each speaker will share their thoughts with us for about 10 minutes, and then there will be time for Q&A. Some questions have already been sent to us, and hopefully there'll be additional questions via the chat function. So it now gives me great pleasure to introduce our first presenter today, Jen. Jen lives in Shetland, where she works as a journalist, and later this year she's moving to Moscow for 9 months. She's worked for the BBC and for local papers, but prior to that was involved in direct action campaigns like Climate Camp and anti-deportation actions, and the movement for land reform in Scotland. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Jen.
Thank you. Thank you for this invitation. I actually accepted with some trepidation, because for many years I tried not to think or talk about this issue. When as you said in the introduction, when I was younger, in my early 20s, I fought, and there was a vibrant, massive network of activists using direct action at that point in this country. And the older ones we learned from had been at Greenham and at the Rhodes protests of the 90s. They knew about police and about violence and about tactics. And at that time, remember, kind of mid-2000s, despite decades of discussion and scientific consensus, no one really wanted to talk about climate change. It was, that whether it even was real was still debated on the radio with both sides, which seems extraordinary now, but it wasn't so long ago. And that meant even less support among the public for what we did, which was to target fossil fuel infrastructure, power stations critical to the grid, and try to shut them down using our bodies and tripods and wire cutters. It was insane. We reckoned it was the only proportionate response, with these warnings ringing in our ears about 12 months left to change course or else. And perhaps you are familiar with all this, and if so, apologies. But I'm constantly surprised by how many people don't know about this. It went on for several years. We had several big annual climate camps, and the one in Kent really stands out for me. I've never seen a police response like that, and I've been on a lot of protests which had a lot of violence involved on the police side. But every single police force in the UK was there, every single one. We'd taken the site early one morning. It was a big field, set up marquees and compost loos and tents and barricades, of course, at the gates. And every single night it was a pitched battle. It was medieval. The police would bash their batons off the side of the van in unison in the dark and play Ride of the Valkyries as they came to get us. And you jump out your sleeping bag and rush to help your friends who were already covered in cuts and bruises from the previous day. It was brutal, and there was helicopters overhead all the time. I noticed over the week that some regional forces were much more violent than others. They seemed to really hate us. It was Nottingham, South Wales, Derbyshire, North Yorkshire and South Yorkshire. I don't know if you see the pattern, but it taught me a lot about British history, because those were the police forces most heavily involved in the miners' strike. The reporting of what went on there was very poor, as it often was for these events. The police claims were taken, too much at face value. So they had big headlines about terrible injuries, which later turned out to be things like bee stings and shutting their fingers in the car door kind of thing. Our injuries weren't really largely reported, particularly not the long-lasting trauma that a lot of people suffered, I think, from that. But public opinion was generally against us, it's fair to say. Shutting down coal-fired power stations was seen as like just too far. And so was stopping planes from taking off, which some people I know subsequently tried to do and went to prison. But what else do you do when you believe that there's no time to save everything? So when things, after all this, quite a lot of violence, and it does affect you, and things started to peter out, and I became very disillusioned with it all. I felt like we'd done our best and put ourselves repeatedly at risk of physical danger, and really, you disrupt your life a lot, and it didn't seem to have changed anything. And I felt scared and I felt powerless, so I focused on other things. But I felt as well like a big sense of generational anger at that point. It felt like we'd risked a lot in that movement, and there was lots of older people in that movement too, of course. But the condemnation came so thick and fast, and it felt like overwhelmingly from the older generations. I mean, in the bigger perspective, we'd risked little compared to those affected by climate change, the kind of life-changing, terrifying shifts. I guess the way that I look at it now is that we were kind of beautifully naive in thinking that we could affect change like that. And perhaps we did affect some change in some ways, but we were very, very uncompromising and judgmental. It was very black and white thinking: car bad, plane bad, live in the tent good. And I don't find so much promise in that kind of approach now, because I've grown up, but maybe it's because I've compromised myself. I have to drive really shitty old cars that pollute in order to do my job, and in order to live in rural places other than becoming a hermit. And I've flown sometimes and felt guilty. I've compromised, as I think most of us do. I tend to see it more gently now. We have to live in a society short of going to live in the woods and eating nuts. We have to participate, and all our actions have impacts, and we can choose to the best of our budget and ability to have greater or lesser impact. But condemning people for their lifestyles is wildly unhelpful, apart from perhaps the very rich. But then I ask myself, do I take this position to sort of absolve myself in the uncompromising eyes of my 20-year-old self, because she was very uncompromising, with climate change so drastic and total a threat, and the consequences so horrendous in different ways? Is an uncompromising radical stance the only one appropriate then and now? How radical, how direct is enough when the world is at stake? I don't know. I don't think I do have the answer to that question. But perhaps the dichotomy is unhelpful anyway. I've more of a big perspective view of things now. Humanity is trying to change, but it's like turning a tanker around. It's a very slow, big turning circle. It takes a long time and a lot of pushing on the wheel, and we can all try and all be part of that. But this big perspective, I don't think it precludes radical action. And I find it, to come back to the generational question, I find it grating and annoying sometimes when I hear so often people saying, and it's so well intentioned, but they say, well, I'm hopeful because of the younger generation, because at least they're doing something, they're active. I mean, I don't like this dichotomy. I don't like the idea that the work is on the shoulders of the young, who frankly face a grim enough future. To be honest, I find it a bit of a cop-out, a bit of an excuse for inaction, because we all need to be building networks and communities of all ages and offering solidarity and support, particularly to those who are going to take the biggest risks. I don't just mean protesting, but everything that we have to face. But particularly with protesting, I mean, a lot of the networks that we relied on to be able to live in this way, to sort of drop out and be activists, All the squats, that there were whole streets in London that were just squats, and they were communities, and there was always a bed, there was always a corner of a room that you could sleep in. And there was so much going on in those places. They were truly inspiring. There was communal houses of activists in every big city, usually several. There were activist centres. Almost all of these have gone. Almost all of them have gone because of property development. It's very, very hard to be able to drop out these days, you know. You can't, I don't think. So I suppose I'm encouraging all ages to look out for each other and build these networks and offer this solidarity that allows younger people or whoever to take action for all the big tasks ahead of us in this big time of change. And I do, on that same note, I have hope, particularly with my focus being on the Highlands and Islands in Scotland. I think that crofting, which is a system of small scale peasant farming, it's you don't own your land usually, but it's a model where people can do lots of different jobs, work on the land. It's a sustainable model. It ticks all these boxes of, you know, sustainable living, growing local food, being in a community, being resilient. And there are lots and lots of young people who want to go back to these rural places and live and do this, but they can't because there's no houses. And there are houses, but they're all sitting empty because they're second homes. And that is a generational issue, and it ties in with climate change and sustainability and everything else. So as everything does, doesn't it, you know? That's my one example of these things, but I'll end with hopefully a bit of hope on that, but for collective action of all ages.
Thank you, Jen. And I think what you're saying is absolutely right, that it has to be collective action from all ages, and sometimes from the comfort of our homes isn't always the right space to be in. And so salute to the courage of all those that take radical action, but also salute to those that feel maybe there's other means as well. So it's that kind of multiplicity of engagement, isn't there, in all kinds of different ways. And weirdly enough, I'm sure there are many police officers that are worried about the climate, for example. Do you know what I mean? As well as it's just a complex world that we live in, and there needs to be complex and very real solutions to the disaster that we're facing. I think it's not even a climate crisis now, but a climate catastrophe. So thank you, and thank you for your honesty. It's been great to hear about the younger Jen as well. Even if to me you're still very much the young Jen, but the younger than that Jen. And I know you've recently just been up, for example, in Findhorn and doing all kinds of really interesting things in another intentional community. So thanks, Jen. And I'm now going to go over to our next speaker. So let me introduce Anish. Anish is a S6 pupil and head boy at Robert Gordon's College in Aberdeen. He runs the pupil-led sustainability group, which he will be talking more about. He got his inspiration to actively fight against climate change after becoming an ambassador for the charity One, which aims to eradicate preventable diseases globally. He's also the youth representative for Aberdeen Interfaith and has previously spoken about different religious perspectives towards nature and the environment. Anish, we're delighted to have you with us, and we look forward to hearing what you're going to share with us.
Thank you so much, Maureen, and I'm really honored to be on this panel discussing an issue that means so much to me. And thank you very much, Jen, for your moving stories about your Jen. Since I've grown up, I've always been acutely aware that climate change was affecting our world. Endless school assemblies discussed about how turning off the lights or walking to school would save the climate. And WWF adverts would highlight the extinction of various species and the need for adoption. And studies in newspapers would urge people to ditch single-use plastics. And I would obediently listen to all this every single time. I always turn off the lights. I try to walk to school as much as I can, and my family has donated to a variety of climate change charities. It is the right thing to do, isn't it? But now what? I've always naively thought that my simple actions would help save the climate. But how do these simple actions help solve a global problem? The simple answer is these actions alone will not solve the problems that our world faces. Buying expensive compostable cutlery or a reusable bag is not going to prevent thousands of tons of plastic waste ending up in a landfill or millions more being produced every day. Instead, personal action is essential to raise the importance of issues to policymakers and businesses. Using your voice as a consumer, as a citizen, and as a member of the electorate will lead to changes on a much grander scale. For me, becoming a youth ambassador for One, a charity that seeks to eradicate preventable diseases while supporting global health, was a turning point for my interest in climate change. Inspired by the activism and efforts of fellow ambassadors, I was determined to make climate change another issue that I would actively highlight and support. With the upcoming Climate Fringe Week from the 18th to the 26th of September, I was keen to raise meaningful awareness and action at my school. In the past, information about the climate crisis had simply come from assemblies and litter group programs. However, presenting an assembly about climate change is no longer enough. Simply encouraging people to recycle is not enough. Genuine awareness and interest arises only when we are made to think for ourselves, instead of being spoon-fed information or being forced to do something. As a result, after joining our school's newly formed sustainability group, I was keen to find ways in which students could reflect about what they have done for the climate, as well as potential actions for the future. From initiating a form class challenge, where students can create a video about what climate change means to them, as well as what they will do for the climate, we hope to allow young people to engage in a topic that matters the most in our world. Other initiatives include a pledge about what each class strives to do as a result of COP26, and to harness the power of sustainable eating in the dining hall. And I'm really excited to see the results of these ventures and hope that they can have a positive influence on our change makers of tomorrow. Meeting other like-minded individuals as part of my school's Gale initiative has allowed me to be exposed to a wide variety of ideas from schools across the globe. From New Zealand to South Africa, the originality of their initiatives, from recycled notebooks and waste audits to physically installing solar and hydro pumps, has certainly motivated me to become bold to express my ideas in public. After all, this is what we need to save our world. Young people who are excited and fearless about tackling the biggest issue that humanity has ever faced. To give an example, Greta Thunberg has certainly been a huge inspiration for me. The originality of her work, the global progress she's made, and the fact that she practices what she preaches has led me to constantly ask myself, what is stopping me from being like her? But what is it that makes young people so influential in our world? In comparison to the politicians who run our governments, why is so much attention given to these supposed torchbearers of the future? Nobel Peace Prize awardee Kailash Satyarthi probably encapsulates this idea better than I ever could. The power of youth is a wealth of the entire world. The faces of young people are the faces of our past, our present, and our future. No segment in society can match the power, idealism, enthusiasm, and courage of young people. And to be honest, I couldn't agree more. Despite my little experience and knowledge, research into this issue has constantly highlighted to me that youth have the ambition and the drive to make sure that targets are exceeded and that goals are as effective as possible. That is what young people bring to this global table. Meanwhile, our current system to help prevent the worst of climate change is in a state of flux, with a massive gap emerging between political parties over the nature and seriousness of climate change. This partisan divide has led to a constant political conflict over the need for climate action. Currently, not a single major developed country has fulfilled its commitments under the Paris Treaty, and the non-profit Climate Action Tracker has rated the plans of a number of countries to achieve the Paris goals as critically insufficient. Protecting our planet should not be an issue left to the hands of political parties who use the climate as a means to further their own agenda. Instead, it's a global issue that requires collaboration and confident leadership. Since humanity has existed, numerous challenges have been posed every day as we've strived to build a better world. With natural disasters, poverty, and pandemics, yes, we are still living in one, we have managed to try and tackle each scenario and recover for a better tomorrow. But it seems that this climate crisis is an amalgamation of all that we have ever known. A 2020 World Bank paper estimated that between 32 million and 132 million additional people will be pushed into extreme poverty by 2030 due to climate change. Meanwhile, lower income countries are often disproportionately affected by climate change. It often takes them longer to rebuild after natural disasters. And according to the United Nations Development Programme, developing countries suffer 99% of the casualties attributed to climate change. And to add to this already growing collection of bleak realities, a catastrophic loss of biodiversity and the reckless destruction of our wildlife has allowed diseases to explode. In short, climate change has the potential to create numerous pandemics. It is believed that a new emerging disease surfaces 5 times every year. One study estimates that more than 3,200 strains of coronaviruses already exist among bats, awaiting an opportunity to jump to people. The diseases have always been there, buried deep in the wild and out of reach of people. But as we destroy the planet's natural defenses, we open the gates to the spread of disease. Despite these seemingly obvious realities, there is still a considerable proportion of people who continue to feed climate change misinformation on the international stage. And with the echo chamber of social media, it is key to fight against this evil that threatens the global unity that is vital to fight climate change. From prime ministers who don't take climate change seriously to presidents physically pulling their countries out of the Paris Agreement, our world is starved of decent, ambitious leaders who make sure that climate change is the #1 priority. I'm probably too young to fully understand the ways of the world, but when you have to choose whether to give the economy or the environment more precedence, I would 100% choose the environment every single time. Without our environment, which provides foundations for everything we do, it is inconceivable to think that we can neglect our world just to boost our economy. Any economy that is built upon exploitation of the environment will never succeed, because that is how dependent we are on our world. And this is the type of logic that only rational young people can provide for tomorrow's future. Since I've grown up, I've always been aware that climate change was affecting our world. But that was not the case 40 years ago, as our forefathers blissfully burned up the world, leaving us to inherit a world that remains afflicted by the disease of climate change. With our world being home to 1.8 billion young people, the largest generation of youth in history, it is vital that we harness their power to shape our future. After all, young people will ultimately be the most affected by climate change. There's no doubt about that. By drawing inspiration from the troubles of yesterday, we can fight the flames of the future. So, to the youth of the world, a one-liner from me would be: rise, awake, and stop not till the goal is reached. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anish. And it's great to hear about what you're doing in your community and in your school. And yeah, it's inspiring. Radical action from Jen and some pretty radical and practical action from you as well, Anish. So it's great, and really, really appreciate you being with us today. I'm now going to introduce our final speaker. It's a pleasure for me to introduce Alexandra, who works for Soka Gakkai International, a community-based Buddhist organization that promotes peace, culture, and education. SGI collaborates with other non-governmental organizations, faith-based organizations, and the UN agencies to address global issues through activities such as raising awareness and engaging in dialogue grounded in the Buddhist teaching of respect for the dignity of life. Based in Geneva, Alexandra coordinates the advocacy work on climate change and the environment. Alexandra, delighted to have you with us, and we look forward to what you're going to share. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Jen and Anish, for what you shared. It was really inspiring. Anish, also, I think, yeah, you embody so much of the practical engagement that is actually really inspiring to me as well, always re-inspiring. And Jen, really, thanks for sharing your experience. It's really the subtleties of the transitions, I feel so enriching. So thanks very much. So maybe from my end, I grew up in a Buddhist family, so I think some principles were always like probably part of my education in terms of always starting with oneself to be the change. And always striving to really reach beyond ourselves, to really enlarge spheres of compassion beyond family, even really to local environment. However, I didn't really grow up as an activist. I was shy, I loved to read, I was really more to myself in a way. But I was fortunate to have sisters, one who is a committed vegan and also fighting really for animal welfare, and another sister who is in agroecology. So actually, thanks to both of them, I learned a lot. Thanks to also other members of my family, I kept learning a lot. But then there was also a turning point experience in my life. I could fulfill one of my dreams to study in Japan. And that was in 2011. And it was actually just at the moment of the tsunami in March and the great earthquake. And after that, having really been able to participate in volunteer activities with the Japanese local people, actually witnessing also how the Japanese people from all over the country would really move themselves to support relief activities in the northern eastern region affected. This power of the solidarity, what we could achieve, it was for the cleanup, but what we could achieve with the power of solidarity really had an impact on me. And then the severity of the crisis, of course, really step by step hit my awareness more and more. Then I came back to Geneva. And I was really thinking, what can I do? Where can I be helpful? And I went back to law studies. So I furthered my studies in law, in like looking at how basically law is created in the context of environment. And I was looking specifically also at the displacement of people because of that. And throughout that journey, what I felt was by also pursuing within myself my own faith journey as well, to keep discovering what is it that I uniquely can contribute. Not being really, I would say, an activist from the start, but definitely wanting to make a contribution. What I discovered was step by step, really my true uniqueness and what I can contribute. And so this has been really an interesting journey for me to be able to step by step actually really start working for these issues of advocacy in terms of climate change and environment questions at the UN now in Geneva for the Soka Gakkai. And what I would say I can see from my fellow youth advocate, and what I would say I am inspired by. So what I can see from really the engagement around me is both a huge energy with really hope. And when we hear stories from so many areas of really people taking action, it's so inspiring, with the courage to really take action, and with the really the skills to be able to do it in solidarity. And at the same time, big anxiety, sometimes really big despair, or feeling overwhelmed about what to do. And so with this, that I think that what really I think is crucial, and what I try to always go back to, is to be listening to stories and be inspired by stories that will bring me back to this courageous hope to take action one step at a time in my own life, which then is leading me to what I am inspired by, is to be able to really take action in solidarity. So when I was saying that what I discovered in terms of my own maybe uniqueness was to be able to maybe bring people together, or to be able to be actually a good listener. And with that, I realized that this is also, in a way, is important to truly respect the person in front of us, the environment in which we are, and together create something. And out of the 2 campaigns that I'm working on right now, I am really inspired by many people from whom I've learned, but especially by people from small island developing countries, who have been really spearheading calls to raise our awareness on the issue, but also leading by example, by transforming their own legislation, by transforming their own communities. And so today, I feel very happy to report that there's been like a big work from many of us in the civil society in support of the call from small developing island states like the Marshall Island, the Republic of the Marshall Island, to get new procedures within the UN. So reports are not enough, but still having procedure that will globally put human rights at the center of climate action, so that really it can be done in a coherent way, in a way that really truly respect the rights of people and the rights of nature, that they are going to put forward for adoption a proposal, a resolution to get a new special rapporteur, a person who will be appointed as a rapporteur to really visit countries, discuss with populations, with communities, and to also highlight good practices to really promote that in a coherent way at the UN level. So sometimes these may seem like to be words and more words. However, I think that witnessing the dynamic and the solidarity within the civil society coalition, together with really affected states, and now really states that are supporting this, gives me hope, really gives me hope. And so on that journey, yeah, I feel that what I want to continue doing is to never give in to despair. And I think yeah, that's what you were saying, Jen, that like sometimes it's people who say I have hope because of the new generation. I have hope because of the new generation, but at the same time, I feel that youthful spirit can be really in anyone, that spirit of courageous action. But this definitely, yes, gives me hope, learning from many stories of people who are transforming their own lives, their own relationship to themselves, to the community, to their environment, and this having an impact just keeps fueling me with really hope that at a deeper level, in terms of consciousness and awareness, I think that if we can compare to the ocean, I feel that the deeper current, there are things that are changing. So this is what I will continue advancing with in terms of that spirit. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alexandra. Gosh, 3 sort of interconnected and related points of view, which have been amazing, and yet very different and very diverse, but still with that energy for doing something in the world that will make a difference. I just hope that those that have the real power wake up and also do something with what's out there. I'm delighted to say that we're getting questions. So I'm going to start off with one directed towards Jen. And just particularly as you've been involved in activism and radical activism, do you think that young people are shaping the attitude of governments towards climate change?
Not really. That's not the young people's fault. How do you change governments? You often do it through protest movements that are loud enough that they can't ignore, that disrupt things, or you do it through, talking and your MP. And I think when the problem is this big, no one thinks it's their fault. No state thinks it's their individual fault, so they don't really take it upon themselves to do that. And it's a much bigger question about the economic system and the political system that we have, and whether it can actually respond to even catastrophic crisis and threat. I guess we're seeing that it can't. Whether young people in particular can influence government policy, I don't know if young people are in a position to be able to influence much, because they're not the ones who are voting yet, or particularly because they don't vote in such large numbers as older people. That influences a lot of our politics, I think. However, there are politicians who do listen, and some of these demands have made it trickled up into the mainstream. So yes, but overall I'm fairly pessimistic about that.
Again, I salute your honesty, Jen. And I'm going to perhaps put that question to Alexandra, because you are very involved in political systems, been involved in the UN, and you might know whether or not the voice of young people is being heard at that kind of level. So I'm putting exactly the same question to you. Are young people shaping the attitude of governments towards climate change?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think that there are different levels. Maybe from my experience, which is at the UN in Geneva currently, I would say that the involvement of young people has been exponential, and they've been like, it's not that there are many young people also really say, like, we don't want to be tokenized. We don't want to be tokenized. We don't want to just be there. You use our voice on the panel and then you just do nothing. So there is that, of course. But for instance, I'm inspired by the fact that they will be invited to speak on panels. They will be invited to. It's small steps, but for instance, some NGOs are now also really having youth advisory boards composed of youth. I feel that there is a much greater sense of understanding that youth is aware and that we have to do it together, and so that we really have to reach out. So I would say that I think that, yeah, to some extent, yes. And also many politicians have children who actually are questioning them as well. So, I mean, yeah, it's definitely not black and white, but I would tend to really look at like where maybe things are moving or people are being questioned. And I think, yeah, youth people really are questioning and pushing and not accepting status quo in that sense. And I'm seeing some changes. I cannot say that I'm seeing some changes like directly in some countries in that sense, because that's, yeah, currently it's not exactly what I've been following, but within the context of the UN, I've seen the power of some voices moving, being caring messages and moving forward. Now, of course, when it comes to really hardcore climate decision in terms of investment in fossil fuel, etc., yeah, we need to make sure that these voices to really turn into action. But I think by constant scrutiny and and calling out and really looking and not letting go, I'm sure that it's really like a wave at some point, really having an impact.
Hopefully more than a wave, a bit like the tsunami that you had in Japan, so that it's not just a wave trickling on the shore, but it's a tsunami of voices and actions would be just amazing. And I'm going to put the same question to the youngest person on the panel, which is Anish. Anish, you have a very articulate young voice, I have to say. But do you feel that young people are shaping the attitude of governments towards climate change, or which way are you leaning at the moment? And that diverse voices are, of course, really important.
Well, in my experience, I do feel that young people have the ability to shape a government's views. There's no doubt about that. My experiences with one, we were actively campaigning to make sure that international aid was raised to the level of 0.7%, as it had been for the last 5 years. And there'd been a lot of protests, a lot of rallies, a lot of writing to MPs. It was so much enthusiasm that was put forward by so much young people to make sure that this issue was on a national scale. And unfortunately, it hasn't worked out the way we want it to be. It's still at 0.5%, so that's still cutting down on aid efforts across the entire world. But it does show that young people have the ability to make change if they want to do it. And it might not be the case for all young people. People I've worked with have been extremely enthusiastic about the issues they've been involved in. But maybe if more young people are voicing out their opinions, and as Jen and Alexandra said, if they're voicing their opinions in votes as a member of the electorate, as a citizen of their country, then no one can stop them. Governments cannot stop a wave of young people coming towards them, telling them that their views are not being heard, because ultimately young people are going to decide the future of every single government. So they have the ability, but unfortunately, I don't think it's happening right now. But with COP26, I'm very hopeful. It's an international stage held here in Glasgow. There have been a number of youth panels that have been set up for the event. And I'm really looking forward to hearing youth on a global stage, raising their opinions side by side with world leaders. And I'm very hopeful that something can come out of that.
It does feel very critically like we've reached a potential turning point for humanity. And I guess, like all of you, some days I'm incredibly hopeful and some days I'm full of despair. And it's very difficult, isn't it, to really pin down how you feel about this crisis that we literally are facing as a human race. And over the last few weeks, I've come across more and more people actually that seem to be suffering poor mental health, partly perhaps because of the pandemic, but with a subtext of the planet, what's happening, what's the point, I feel powerless. And so another question that has been sent in to us is basically this one. Do you think, Jen, I'll put it to you, that the climate crisis is a contributing factor towards poor mental health in young people? And I think politicians need to hear this very clearly.
I do think it. I do think the anxiety and the worry and the lack of certainty. I remember having a very illuminating conversation with a boss a few years ago, and I was saying that a lot of people that I know are not going to have children. They've decided because they don't believe there's a certain enough future, or at least that it's going to be very bleak. Or additionally, they believe that adding more lives into the earth is irresponsible, which I profoundly disagree with. But no, I mean, yeah, it's affecting people in all sorts of ways. If you can't imagine a future, that what what are you meant to do? How do you even process that? It's unimaginable. I think the main thing that's making people very sad and depressed and anxious is our disconnection from each other and the disintegration of our communities. But sure, I think climate change and the various other biodiversity things around that is having a huge effect.
Thank you. Alexandra, do you have any thoughts on that? I think Buddhists have always had a focus on mental health or the mind, so maybe you'll have some illuminating thoughts for us on whether the climate crisis is impacting on poor mental health in young people.
Yes, and to jump on what Jen was saying, I think there is a study that was released, a survey that was released like a few days ago, that's been looking at 10 countries and 10,000 youth, I think, across 10 countries. But also, I think for the first time, they were adding questions about also this feeling of anxiety that arises from also the level of inadequacy of measures that they see taken by governments in response to the current crisis. And so this also increasing all the other elements that Jen mentioned in terms of like maybe despair, maybe not wanting to have children. So yeah, I think that's very present. And yeah, I would say very clearly that for me, I think my faith, my Buddhist faith is very at the center of my motivation to keep moving every day, basically, because I think it always brings everything back to relationship, but like in a comprehensive way. So to the relationship to myself, really to the relationship to others and then my own environment. But I really, when I go back to that, I really feel empowered. I feel there is always something I can do. There is always something, and yeah, granted, it will be sometimes limited reach, but then, yeah, when I feel that I can tap into that immense potential that even I am not aware of in terms of the relationship I can create and the value that can be created out of the relationship. And I think you're really right, Jen, in terms of this maybe feeling of hopelessness might really come of this feeling of disintegration of the community in a way. And so I think that really focusing on the relationship, on really doing things together, and on the relationship to ourselves as well, is crucial, is really crucial.
Thank you. Anish, I'm going to ask you a different question, but thank you for sharing those both those perspectives on the climate crisis in relationship to mental health. Previously, we've had panel discussions about the climate crisis in relationship to politics, religion, science, economy, and refugees. You know, as a young person, a young Hindu, which issue speaks out most to you, and why might it? So I'll repeat them. It's politics, religion, science, economy, and refugees, but in relationship to the climate crisis. Is there any of those that really resonate with you as one of the key issues in relationship to the climate crisis?
Sorry, Maureen, was borders mentioned?
Yeah, borders as well.
Yes,
that was
borders.
the one about refugees, but yes, it was a climate crisis beyond borders.
Okay, right. Well, to be honest, all these issues do encompass climate change in a variety of ways, and I guess it reiterates what everyone has said throughout this panel discussion. It's that climate change is this horrific amalgamation of all the disasters that we've ever known. Climate change is causing poverty, it is actively causing pandemics, and is actively killing people in a variety of ways, from natural disasters to refugees in isolated areas. So taking all this to account, I think the fact that climate change is something that is actively destroying countries in Bangladesh, parts of the country are being flooded and are uninhabitable. Those things really do strike a chord within me. Like, I'm thankful to be living in a city where there's so many barricades from the ocean, there's so much infrastructure to make sure that that doesn't happen. But for the world's poorest who don't necessarily have access to that, that is quite shocking. And the fact that their homes, their livelihoods, everything that they've ever known is swallowed up, and that's it, they're displaced, that is really quite frightening. And I think this idea of climate change beyond borders highlights that very well. And the other part is climate change is a global issue. It's not something limited just to one country. Every country has had a role to play in this climate crisis, no matter how insignificant it is. While those may argue that developed industrial countries do have a major role to play, considering that their economies were built upon fossil fuels. I completely understand that, and they are the ones who do need to make drastic changes. At the same time, everyone has a role to play. It's a global challenge that requires unity from every single person. And at that time, I think climate change beyond borders is the most important thing. Politics is integral within that. Religion is integral within that. Every religion teaches us all to respect nature, to be in harmony with nature. Not a single religion doubts that. And so I think everything is embedded within that concept that climate change is something that is beyond borders. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. I'm wondering if that might be a really interesting point to end on, that sense that it's a global issue, and that it's a pretty obvious thing, that we feel, but sometimes just stating it so emphatically is really important. I want to actually just ask a personal question of Alexandra, because I feel that you're at the UN and you may know this information. I heard just recently something, just yesterday actually, something that deeply disturbed me in relationship to COP26, and that was that the decisions that were going to be made at COP were only going to be made directly by those that are present, which means the wealthy Western nations of the global North, and that online consultations and decisions were not going to be made, which means actually the people in the global South, those most impacted by the climate crisis, are going to have absolutely no voice unless others advocate for them. It seemed so ludicrous that I felt it couldn't be true. So I'm going to ask you if you have heard anything on that front, Alexandra, because I didn't know where to look to find whether the information was accurate or not. And this is something maybe that young people should be shouting very loudly about, the injustice of that, if it is a reality.
Yes, indeed. So it's really a principle that the negotiations, it's actually also to the call of certain countries, that has been for a long time, that negotiations have to take place in person. So usually the climate negotiations, they have that process also in the mid-year in June. And that was already a question where some decisions should have been made then as well. But then it was clear that because it was online, it would not be called negotiations. It will not negotiations. So I think that indeed it's, and I think that's why, given the current state of the world with the vaccination, etc., that's why I think like the global network of environment and much broader range of NGOs, that's the Climate Action Network, they have called very strongly for postponement of COP, not knowing very willingly that it's not postponing decisions, but it's a matter of principle of really not putting the health of the delegate and the local population at risk, and also not leaving out of the negotiation room states that are most affected, and that actually many of them are leading by example now in terms of the adaptation plan that they've adopted, their nationally determined contributions. So yeah, I think it's disturbing. I think we need to keep calling out, and I think that it needs to be it really needs to be part of like the some important reforms that need to happen for truly inclusive negotiations and agreements to move forward.
Thank you so much. And this is where we're back to the climate crisis as a human rights issue, really. And it goes hand in hand with COVID and vaccination. You know, the fact that some of the global South only have 2% of their population vaccinated, so they're not able to travel. There is massive injustice. We cannot look at the climate crisis without looking at injustice on at a massive scale that needs to be addressed. Back to the voice of Jen, perhaps sometimes quite radically. So to all of you, thank you so much. Thank you for the work that you do, and thank you for being here with us this afternoon. It's been a great pleasure to be with with all three of you, and I've really, really enjoyed listening to what you have to say. And I'm not going to use the cliche of "you give me hope." I don't. I think that, as Jen said, it's not good enough for us oldies to say it. We have to be out there, being as active and radical as our aging bodies will let us be. So for now, thank you. It's been a real pleasure, and thank you to all those that sent in questions. This is, as you know, recorded live, but it will be going out across all our networks. So we hope to get a lot of engagement with it, and wish you all the best. And Jen, as you head off to Moscow, safe travels and best. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.